Good morning, everyone. Welcome this morning. We are going to start with the song Arky Arky, and I'm going to invite all the junior church kids to come up here. You're being voluntold to come on up front. You've been practicing this in junior church. It's got motions. They're all looking at me like, no, I'm not doing that. Well, the girls will come up at least. You guys remember all this from junior church, right? Chris has been doing a really good job teaching you this. So I'll invite you to join me in standing. There are 5 verses here and some chorus. Thank you, guys. You did well. You may be seated. Carissa, you did really well, too. I was watching. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord, we're thankful this morning for the instruction that you've given us, for the word that you've given us. Sometimes it might seem a little crazy, like what you told Noah, build me a boat. But if we follow you and do what you tell us to do, it's the right thing, and it'll work out the best for us. We ask that you'll be with us as we study your word this morning, that we will learn from it and follow it. In your name I pray. Amen. You may be seated, but the Merlaus class. Good. For second, third, and fourth? your class. Just third and fourth. That makes you 5th and 6th.
John 15:5. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. John 15:5.
Good. The soon-to-be adults class. Good. And really adults class. Good. I'll invite the other classes to join you in standing, and we're going to do the first 2 verses in the chorus as they're dismissed. Thank you. You may be seated.
Carissa abandoned the motions. She was just putting on a show earlier to the children. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. We've been in a February memory verse for a 3 weeks now. Anybody need one still? Hey, Greg. Ready? I'd probably take somebody's eye out. I was never any good at card throwing anyways. Next week, Richard will be summarizing the themes from the book of Job, and we'll have a memory verse card for the spring quarter. Who knows what we're doing in the spring quarter in Sunday school, in the adult Sunday school class? Phyllis, the book of Colossians. That I'm looking forward to. That was when I first started pastoring in 1996. That was the first book I preached through as a professional. The book of Colossians. Pastor Holmes preached through Colossians early on in his pastorate here. Notes for today. Anybody? Richard and Carrie are passing out notes for next week. These are leftovers from last week. Doreen's back among the living. That's good. Yeah. Anybody else? Hey, Ann. Were you and Carrie gone last week too? Huh? Carrie was? You were here? I think you were both gone. I don't know for sure. Huh? I think they were sick too. You didn't work Tuesday, but that was because Pam was wanting to leave and go down and visit with some friends of hers. Right? So today is really our last piece in Job's, the last piece in the book of Job. Again, Richard next week will sort of go back and catch the big ideas and put all the pieces together, I trust. Don't forget where we are. We're in chapter 42, I know that. In chapter 42, just the last 11 verses. But don't forget where we are in the story of Job. Remember how we got started? Satan was running around with the sons of God, and God says to Satan, hey, what are you doing here? Where you been? Satan says, well, I've been going around, checking things out. It's a paraphrase. God says to Satan, what do you think about Job? He's a righteous man. Satan says, no, he just loves you because you take such good care of him. God says, go ahead and take his stuff away. See what happens. God does. It's a miserable experience for Job. Again, we may talk about that more today, but Richard certainly will next week. Eventually, Satan's running around again with the angels, and God says to Satan, where you been? Satan, so I've been going about. God says again to Satan, what about Job? Satan says, well, he only loves you because you protect his life, because you take good care of not his stuff, but him. God says, go ahead, afflict him, but don't kill him. And that's where we are. Job is destitute. He's lost his children. He's lost all of his possessions. He's lost his health. And we're still there when we come to this point in chapter 42. So don't lose track of that. It's not that somehow Job's life has become really pleasant. It has not become pleasant yet. He's been through the ringer, both in terms of what God did to him and what his friends did to him. Here's the first question on today's homework. Suppose Job remained ill and poor the rest of his days. Would that be a problem for you? No. He doesn't deserve anything else. God sovereignly arranged your life in the same way that God sovereignly arranged my life. And the lot that I have is the lot that I have, and God is not to be criticized for that. So here Job is in a world of hurt, and yet God is not to be blamed for that. So that was my question. If that was the way that Job's story ended, would God be discredited? Go ahead, Phyllis. Yes. Yes. He is. He is. Yeah, we have been so infected by kind of a mild health, wealth, prosperity gospel. As Americans, we tend to think that life is supposed to be good. Well, my life is really good, and so is yours, for the most part. But there are believers around the world, even today, who are enduring persecution to the point of death. Yes, yes, because they refuse to compromise. Yep, I agree. So if that was the case, if Job had remained sick and poor and just a loser in the eyes of the world, if Job had remained that way to the end of his life, would you conclude that Job's life had a happy? Yes, if Job remains confident in God, if Job remains faithful to God, if Job doesn't give up his commitment to God and who God is and what God has a right to do. So again, just don't forget where we are in the Job story. We are not yet at a pleasant ending, but we are at a place where Job has been faithful to God, both before and after God afflicted him. Gerald? Yes? Yeah, if Job had died, his friends would have thought it was not a good ending, but they'd have been wrong. Yeah. I'm rereading Pilgrim's Progress right now, so you'll hear me make occasional references to events in Pilgrim's Progress. Many of you have read it, probably back in your childhood, but I was thinking this week about Christian and Faithful who were traveling together and were incarcerated together for a long time. And eventually, Faithful loses his life. Faithful is killed. He's martyred. Christian goes on. And Christian feels bad because he somehow thinks about Faithful, and his giving his life for the sake of the gospel was to be admired. If Job had died in the midst of this, his friends would have said, that just goes to show you. But they'd have been wrong. That's not the way the world really operates. Phyllis? They would have thought they were right. Yes. Yes. Yeah, if Job had died, they would have been vindicated in their error. They would have continued to spout that heresy. Um, and maybe they will too in time. I mean, Job's going to live after today for another 140 years. So his friends have got more time to drift back into bad habits, I'm sure. Mike? Yeah? Well, that sounds good, Mike. Yeah. Yeah. So you've known people who spouted heresy and got away with it. And you wonder, why does not God bring the hammer down on them? It's kind of like Habakkuk. Habakkuk, who says about the people of Israel, he says to God, how can you tolerate their sinfulness? God says, I'm not going to tolerate it. I'm going to judge them. Habakkuk says, good. God says, I'm going to bring the Chaldeans in, the Babylonians in. Habakkuk says, no, they're even worse than the Israelites. You can't do that. No, God can do what God wants to do, and he is not to be criticized. Go ahead, Charlene. He did. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Hmm. Yeah. This gift, you mean the affliction? Yeah. So Job is a true and honest, a real servant of God, and so this business that Job has been through is a gift. It's really hard to think of it that way, though, isn't it? I don't tend to think of affliction as a gift. Richard? Blessed be. Yeah. Yeah. Right. With my health, without my health. Yep. All of that. Whatever it is that is precious to you, those things that life has brought you, whether it's a skill that you have or stuff that you've bought, all of that is of no account compared to faithfulness to the God who gives it. Mary? Beulah? Yeah, I assume. We don't read anything about Beulah dying, sadly. I'm not a Beulah fan. Can you tell? She's kind of a hateful woman. I know. I know. She's feeling bad for her husband who's undergoing tremendous difficulty and says to him, I want you to get out of this. Just curse God and die. Uh, I assume there's no record about Job getting a new wife and no record about Beulah dying. I assume she's going to be the mother of his future children. Margaret? Yeah. It's very important to us, but it's not nearly as important as faithfulness to our God. Yeah. Gerald? Okay. They did. Yeah, because they had been taught. They had been taught in the Pentateuch, in the law, that obedience brings blessing and disobedience brings curses. God made those promises to his people. And so Job's friends, like every other person of the day probably, thought exactly like they thought, that you must be a sinner because you're suffering. Doug, was that Doug's hand? Was that your hand? Richard? Margaret Armstrong. Yes? Born to her? That's not nice. You won't see Margaret today, but when you see her again, you feel free to tell her that's not nice. Richard says Margaret says no loving God would allow 10 more kids to be born to Beulah. By that, did she mean that Beulah was such a lousy person, or that no woman should have to bear that many children? Yeah. I got to thinking about that this week for some reason, about Beulah having more children. And you know people who have a gob of children. I mean, I don't mean Joy. Joy had 7. 7? Joy had 7 kids. That's not really that many. Compared to, it's that many compared to the average today, but perhaps you know people who have had 15, 18, 20 kids. Wes and Karen Visser were school parents. They had children in the school here. I don't remember how many kids by the time the twins were born. Those are probably the youngest ones, aren't they? Are there some after the twins? 3 more after the twins? What do you suppose that makes for a total, Mark? Somewhere in the high teens or early 20s? Only 17? And just one set of twins. That's a lot of children. They're a farming family. You could put them to work. Right? What I mean by that is it's not like he worked at a factory and she just had to manage the children. They had business to attend to that having that many children would have been a real blessing for. Thanks, Mark, for that update. All right. Job's friends, Job's restoration, the rest of the story. Job's friends, chapter 42, verse 7. The question I'll ask is, what did God think of Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar's theology? Job 42:7. After Yahweh had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, "My anger burns against you and against your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." So what does God think about the theology of Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad? He's speaking to Eliphaz, but about Eliphaz and his friends. Richard? That's pretty strong, isn't it? God doesn't say, I'm sort of bothered a little bit by what they said. No. My anger burns. His nose snorts. He's furious. It's bad news. You should not live your life in such a way that God's anger burns against you. Gerald? He did. Yeah. Deadly serious, and he'll command a bloody sacrifice to make atonement for them. Charlene? The 3 musketeers, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar? Yeah. Well, again, I liked them when they weren't talking. When they first showed up, they were faithful friends, came and sat with Job in that ash heap for a week. But then once they began to talk, I became less and less a fan of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Their theology bothered me. Let's see if we can summarize that in a moment. Go ahead, Richard. Yeah. The foolishness. Yep. Kind of like, remember Nabal? Nabal, who was Abigail's first husband. And David interacts with Nabal. David has been taking care and protecting Nabal's property and asks for a bit of kindness from Nabal, and Nabal refuses. And David's going to go take care of that problem. And Nabal, his name means fool. Yeah, Nabal is his name and folly is his game. So these guys are foolish in that same sense. Joy? Stop it. Don't be meddling, Joy. We do. No. I think as I age, I think I'm getting better at not making proclamations that I can't support. I think when I was a young pastor, it was easy for me to think I had everything nice, tightly packed. I had all I needed. As I've gotten older, I learn, I think, that I have less and less of it together. Yeah, maybe. But then the problem is everything else is going to go away, and I won't know anything. I don't know. Summarize the theology of Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar. Let's see if we can just craft a summary. Their theology says, It's of the world. I appreciate that. What are the bullet points of Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad's theology? Phyllis? Do good, be blessed, sin, and you'll be cursed. That's not terrible theology, except that it's taking what should be principles and turning them into inviolable rules. And the problem they had was they don't know what Job has done, but they assume from his consequence that he must have done bad. Right? So they're turning the logic backwards. If God says, obey me, I will bless you. Disobey me, I will curse you. Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz have made the assumption that you're cursed, therefore you must have disobeyed. Richard? Right. Right. Yeah. 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 They were. They did. And they accused him of taking advantage of widows and orphans. He wasn't, yeah, he's certainly not a kind person. I don't see any truth in that. Yeah, it is, you're right, Joy. It is critical that we speak rightly. But it's easy for us to drift into our own preconceived ideas. We take the scriptures and twist them. We're all guilty of that. We dare not, but it's so easy for us to do. So the wicked suffer, the righteous prosper. The problem is they concluded that sufferers are wicked and prosperers are righteous. But that's not by any means always the case. It is not necessarily true that the sufferers are wicked or that the prosperers are righteous. One of you guys mentioned over here that God took this sin of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar so seriously that it required a bloody sacrifice. Look at verse 8. Here's what God says to Job. He says this to Eliphaz. Verse 8, chapter 42. Now therefore take 7 bulls, 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer not to deal with you according to your folly. For you've not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite went and did what Yahweh had told them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. Who, according to the Old Testament, was supposed to offer sacrifices? The priests. Is it a problem for you that Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz, who are going to offer these animal sacrifices, are not priests? They're not Levites. How do you know they're not Levites? Because there's no Levi. So let us be careful that we don't somehow read back into Job those Levitical regulations, because Job is living, I imagine, about the time of Levi's great-great-great-great-grandfather. So don't be stirred up about how these non-Levites are offering sacrifices. In the same way, you shouldn't be disturbed that Job is going to act like a priest, because, after all, he's not a Levite. He's not, by any means, a high priest as a descendant of Aaron. Well, those are inappropriate questions to ask, because chronologically, we're way before the time when the Levitical system will come about. Go ahead, Gerald. Yeah, sure. This would be close to the time of Melchizedek, who is a priest not in the Levitical line, right? The author of Hebrews makes a big deal about that. And Abram will offer sacrifice, so to speak. He'll offer a gift to Melchizedek. And so, so Levi in the loins, this is the author of Hebrews argument, Levi in the loins of Abraham will demonstrate his allegiance to this priest who is not after the order of Levi, in the same way that there will come another, again, the author of Hebrews says, another high priest, not after the order of Levi, but rather after the order of Melchizedek. This is a priest who will be of Judah, the tribe of Judah. Go ahead, Phyllis. This is a piece. No, this is not to go out and catch a squirrel. No, this is 7 bulls and 7 rams. Yeah, this was not any small matter. But I assume Job's friends are rather wealthy, as Job used to be. So I don't know whether this is a widow's mite or if this is just the loose change that they happen to have left over after they counted all the rest of their rams and bulls. I don't know. Yes, apparently. It could be. Yeah, that makes sense. So, Job's friends have been very hateful to him. They have said really mean things to him. They have said to him, listen, pal, the reason that you're going through so much trouble is because you're such a louse. To the point where they accuse him of things concretely that are patently not true. And yet God tells them to take this offering and that Job will pray for them. Do you find it difficult to pray for friends who have treated you poorly? Is that hard for you? Did it used to be? What made the difference, Mary? Yeah. I can go back and forth there. There are times where I can be really gracious and be the big man in the conversation, and other times where I can be really petty. Yes, Ron? Maybe. But praying for my enemy is what God requires, yes. Whether it works out in terms of the benefit to me or not, it changes my attitude. When you've despitefully used me and I pray for you, that changes my attitude toward you, which is a win for both of us. Go ahead, Margaret. Uh-huh. Huh. Able to pray for them. When you pray for them, do you pray that their tent would be infested with fleas? No. When you pray for them, you pray that they might prosper. You pray that they might have intimacy with God that will impact their life for the good. That's hard, though. It is. It is hard. Because selfishly, I want to see those who have made themselves to be my enemies, whether they really are or not. I want to see them pay. But that's a terrible attitude on my part. Instead, I should be all the more eager to pray for those who have despitefully used me. There was a hand here, now I've lost it. Just go ahead, Richard. Yes. Yes. Yeah. The teen memory verse this month, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32. Be tenderhearted, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ has forgiven you. How dare I somehow treat them, these people who have done me wrong, how dare I treat them in a way that is so subpar compared to the way God has treated me? Go ahead. Uh-huh. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So we do this business of praying for those so that we might show that we really are sons of the Father. Yeah, with fear and trembling. Yeah, so I'm confident. I am confident in my status as a child of God. Yet my salvation continues to be worked out bit by bit, inch by inch. Yeah, that's true for me. Did I miss you? Go ahead, Bill. Yeah, yeah, right. You know, Jesus' disciples came to him one time, as Peter mostly, who said to Jesus, my brother, when he sins against me, how often do I have to forgive him? Peter says, I'm gonna really show off how forgiving I am. I'll do it 7 times. You come back and do that to me again and again and again and again and again and again and again. I'm going to show how mature I am. I'll forgive 7 times. Jesus tells a story, right? Tells a story about a slave who owed a debt he could never repay. The king calls for the debts to be paid, and the slave falls down before him and says, well, give me time. I'll pay back every cent. And the master forgives the slave that totally unpayable debt. And then that slave goes out and finds a fellow slave who owes him $1. And he grabs him by the neck and begins to choke him. Says, pay up. The master hears about this in Jesus' parable, right? Calls that first slave in and says, okay, the debt's due again now. And you're going to be handed over to the torturers. I think this is hell, until you repay all of that debt, because you can't. Jesus' point here to Peter is 7's not enough, because you've been forgiven a debt that you could never repay. How dare you hold your brother to a standard like 7 times and you're out, even though 7 seems like a lot to Peter and seems like a lot to us. Don't forget what God said about Job at the beginning of our study. Back in chapter 1, chapter 2, God says to Satan, did you consider Job? He's upright, he's righteous. He's a man that is, some of our English translations say is perfect. Although I know Job's a sinner. I know that. But he is a specimen of trust in God. And so I'm not really surprised that God expects Job to pray for Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz, but it is a hard thing to do, to pray for those who have used you poorly. Does this tell us anything about what God thinks about Job's theology? So God has criticized Job already. We saw that last week in chapters 40 and 41. God has said to Job, you think you got this all figured out. Eventually, when God's done, Job says, I don't have it figured out. Our memory verse, I put my hand over my mouth. So Job's theology is a little wonky. God has been trying to correct that. But compared to his friends, Job is the one who is now going to offer prayer for those men. It feels like an affirmation of Job's theology, even though it is not without error. You want to correct me on that? Go ahead, Phyllis. Yeah, we are but dust. Well, yes, God does, but God does hold us to a standard of perfection, and if you fail to meet his standard, you have hell to pay, literally. But recognizing that, God sent his only Son to be a propitiation, an atoning sacrifice for our sins. He does. He does. Yep. Yes. He does. God deals with us according to our nature. Richard? Right? Don't you just? Yeah. Not just you. So do I. Yeah. Yeah. They don't spin or toil. Right? He has. Yeah, take that. He has been taking care of you, and he will continue. Mary? Right? Well, and the Bible uses that phrase frequently. The only trouble with that is if you, like Zach, had a dad who was a dud. And then I don't know how you're supposed to think about that positively, but yes, yes. Yeah, because it is true that the Bible speaks that way. We're taught to pray that way. Our Father, who is in heaven, may your name be hallowed, right? Right? No, your father, my father, and Zach's father were a far cry from the fatherhood of God, right? All right, anything else you want to say about Job and his theology? Go ahead, Michelle. He did. Well, I don't. There's nothing here. There's nothing in the account in the narrative yet about Job having any um, relief from his condition. Well, they offer the sacrifices, and he offers the prayers. He's been interacting with them and having conversation with them. He's been defending himself rather vigorously in terms of his speech, but all the while scraping his skin with broken pieces of glass, if that's what you call a good time. Yeah, I don't think I have any reason to believe that he's well yet. I also am not going to find a statement later in the chapter that says God restored Job's health. I just assume that. I don't know. I don't know how it happened, Charlene. Yeah, maybe it'd be scabby for a while. Even when the boils begin to heal, yeah, you still have the scars for a bit. I don't know, not having had a boil. If I did, I would not go to Joy, because I've heard stories. Joy has implements. If you want to know this, if you want to know those kinds of stories, talk to Jim, not to Joy. Anything else about Job's theology? Go ahead, Renda. Yes, he did. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I think when Job first begins to interact with his friends, he's asking a lot of questions. I think as the cycles continue, Job becomes a little more feisty, a little more where he's making bold proclamations. And that's where when he gets to talking to God in chapters 40 and 41, it's like, okay, I was wrong. Yeah. Yes. 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 Yeah. Even when you don't get answers to your questions, recognize that God is God. Verse 10, I'm going to skip verse 11 for a moment. Verse 10 and verse 12. Chapter 42, verse 10, the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Verse 12, the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. So the question I asked is, what did Job get back? Did he get his health back? I'm making an assumption there because the text doesn't tell us that. He's going to start fathering children again, which would imply that there's a measure of health. I don't know. I mean, somebody said, well, was it you, Michelle? Who said, was he already becoming healthy? I don't know. Somewhere, I think Job gets his health back, but he certainly gets some other stuff back here in these verses, right? Stuff. So his 401k had been totally drained, and now all of a sudden the money's back in the account. Because you and I, most of us don't have camels, oxen, donkeys as measure of our wealth, right? We measure our wealth in dollars for the most part. And maybe you don't have a 401k. I don't either anymore. It's all in an IRA now. It was in a 401k when I was a Kellogg employee. So what did Job get back? His health? I think so, but the text doesn't tell us that. What did he get back? All of his wealth, plus. Yeah, all the stuff that he once had. He now is going to be the rich man in the community. There'll be a story to be told, won't there, as time goes on. Did God owe Job the wealth that he provided him? Not for a second. Job didn't have that coming, did he? Neither do you. You know, some of you have accumulated a sizable nest egg. Good for you. God commands us to be diligent to provide for our families. Great. You men, we're going to die before our wives. That's what the actuarial tables say. Even if you're not older, Annie would remind you that I'm much older than her. A month and 3 days. But she will not fail to tell you if you asked her that oh, he's older than I am. So we men, we're going to die before our wives probably, and we ought to be setting them up so that they can continue to live. So be diligent about that. I'm not trying to diminish the importance of saving, but at the same time, God doesn't owe you that. He has graciously blessed us and has given us resources. He didn't owe that to Job either. Anything else you want to say about what Job got back in verses 10 and 12? Go ahead, Rich. Oh, that's in verse 11. Don't bring that up yet. Joy? You know, I thought that too from time to time. At the same time, there's a little brown round thing on the floor here. Should I eat it? No. Yeah. If I had grandkids in the room, I've done that at Wendy's, picked up a chicken nugget off the floor. Not one that I just found, one that one of the kids dropped on the floor, just and eat it, just to gross them out. All right, Joy, back to the question at hand. Job gets back double, but you don't think that this causes him to be prideful. But remember the analysis that God gives of Job at the beginning when he's already a rich man. He's upright, righteous, perfect. I suspect Job's wealth, either Job's wealth at the beginning or Job's wealth at the end, did not cause Job to be that kind of a guy. I think you're right, but I would have applied that to the beginning Job as well if I was making that call. Mike, go ahead. I would assume that. I'll assume that especially because we get around to a new family here in a minute. Okay, friends and family, Rich, you want to talk about verse 11. Verse 11, then came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before and ate bread with him in his house, and they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that Yahweh had brought upon him. Each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. So God restored relationships. What a blessing. Have you experienced God's grace through family and friends? Some of you have family that's very pleasant to you. And some of you have family that you barely tolerate. So I understand that. But what we do have certainly in common is our relationships here. I'm here to tell you that you people, Jesus would say, these are my mother and brothers, right? You people are to me the precious ones in life. Is that true for you as well? Your relationships in this context are so important to us. I can't imagine. If I was somehow tempted to turn my back and walk away, what I lose is not to be lost. Was that a hand, Mary? Yeah? Same convictions, yeah? Right. Yeah. I can't imagine being a Christian, so-called, and not having these relationships. That doesn't sound pleasant to me. Yeah, family and friends. Lastly, lest we run out of time, the last 4 verses of Job chapter 42. New family, not the last 4. The 5th through the next to last verse, verses 13 through 16. Job also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He called the name of the first daughter Jemima, and the name of the second Keziah, and the name of the third Karen Hapuk. And in all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters. Their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers, and after this Job lived 140 years and saw his sons, his grandsons, his great-grandsons, his great-great-grandsons. That is a blessing. Job lost 10 kids. God replaces 10 kids. So Job and Beulah have 10 more children, regardless of what Margaret Armstrong has said. And those kids are a blessing. A unique thing about Job and his kids is he gives an inheritance to his daughters, which was unheard of in the day. There's a biblical account in the book of Numbers. Is that right, Bob? Is it Numbers? These are the daughters of, it's a Benjamite fellow. Do you remember his name? Is it Zelophehad? Does somebody think that's right? I should have looked. There's this Benjamite who doesn't have any sons, but he has daughters, and it wasn't the custom of the day to give an inheritance to the daughters, and they had to go to Moses and the elders and get permission to give an inheritance to the daughters instead of to the non-existent sons. So for those of you that have only had daughters, I trust you'll leave an inheritance to your daughters, not to some stranger. So Job gives an inheritance to his 3 beautiful daughters. And what beautiful names, don't you think? When you and Patrick start having daughters, you could name them things like Jemima and Keziah and Karen Hapuk. Of those 3, I think I like Jemima best, if I had to make a choice. Yes, Mark. Your niece's name is Keziah, named after Job's daughter? Whose child is this? Your brother's daughter is named Keziah? Can you imagine when she goes to school? The first day she goes to third grade and the new teacher says, she's going down through the list of people in the class. She comes to Kezi. Yeah, it's names like that give teachers on the first day of class, Donna, trouble. I still remember Luke Cook. So you remember Larry and Pam Cook, their 4 children. Second son, Luke, married Carrie Bolthouse. And Luke and Carrie, I don't know where they're living now, Kalamazoo Way. Luke's working for the Bolthouse Merchandising, former Bolthouse Merchandising Corp. Anyways, Carrie is a music teacher at Kalamazoo Public Schools, and so she had first day of class trying to get through the kids' names, and there was a name on the list, and the name was spelled L-A-A. And she says, is it La-A? And the little girl says, it's Ladasha. And sometimes it's just ignorant parents, and I'm not accusing Michael of being ignorant, but they give their kids these names that are really hard for teachers on the first day of class. So Job starts fathering a new family late in life and still has the privilege of testifying of God's faithfulness to his kids, his grandkids, and his great-grandkids, grandkids, great-grandchildren, great-great-grand, 4 generations, great-great-grandchildren. Some of you have lost a child. And I don't want to have you talk about this because that just gets us all to being weepy. The question, though, that comes to my mind, does a subsequent child replace the child who died? No. Did Job's pain of having lost 10 children, was it totally assuaged, totally done away with by having 10 new children? No. No, that pain still exists. God was gracious. God gave him a lot of stuff, 10 children. For that, Job would be thankful. Here's the rest of the story. After this, Job, verse 16, lived 140 years. Jewish tradition says he was 70 when the book starts. So he lives twice as long after the book as he does before the book. He lives 140 more years and sees 4 generations. And Job died, an old man, full of days. James speaks about Job. I'll just turn to James chapter 5, verse 11. I want to ask you to turn there. Here's what it says. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You've heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you've seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. So James, the half-brother of Jesus, reflects back on Job and sees in Job a record of steadfastness and faithfulness and how God accomplishes his purposes, being compassionate and merciful. You could testify about God's loving care in your life, couldn't you? Go ahead, Bill. I have no idea. Yeah. I don't know. The question Bill's asking, why did the author of the narrative of Job there at the end give the names of the 3 girls but not the 7 sons? I don't have a clue. Maybe he did what George Foreman did and named all of his kids Job, and Job. Go ahead. Yeah. No. Well, unless those children didn't have children yet, I don't know. I have no, so Charlene's just asking about grandchildren from that first family. I don't know anything about them. Maybe, I don't know what time, I don't know what age you start having children when you're living in Abraham's day. How old was Abraham when he had his first child? He's an old man, yeah. Can you testify to God's loving care in your life? You could. We could spend the next hour on that. Can you thank God for afflictions he's brought into your life? I don't want to, but I can and I should. So how about it today? Can you trust God? Will you trust God with the uncertainties about your future? Because they're there. things are going to happen that you're not going to like. And when they do, make a decision today to trust him so that in that day, you'll be able to. Richard, we'll look forward to a summary next week. Thanks.